one of the most structurally strange correlation dives we have ever taken.
It really is. We're covering thousands of miles, thousands of years.
We're starting with a botanical mystery. A plant so valuable, it basically defined the economy of the ancient Mediterranean.
Yeah.
And then it just vanished completely.
And from there, we're jumping straight into modern quantum physics. We're talking engineered invisibility, anti-surveillance clothing. It feels like a completely impossible chasm to cross.
It does.
Yeah.
But when you zoom out, like you said in your notes, and you ignore the chemistry for a minute,
Right.
and you focus purely on this fundamental engineering principle of structure,
Yeah.
you find this shocking symmetry. It connects the ancient past and the cutting-edge future.
It's all about one single powerful technological motif that keeps reappearing. Farad.
So our mission today, based on all this material, is to answer a really profound question. Are the core principles of advanced modern engineering, specifically something called metamaterials, are they actually just repeating, almost mathematically, these ancient secrets rooted in nature, myth, and a single family of plants?
And we're going to do that by focusing on the legend of the lost goldenrod.
To really succeed in this deep dive, we need to map out 4 distinct zones for you, the listener.
Okay, so first we have to define exactly what this plant, Silphium, was. We need to understand how it worked as the ancient world's most critical pharmaceutical and why its disappearance is now considered humanity's first recorded species extinction.
Then second, we're going to establish this geographical and mythological link between that North African plant and ancient Dacia, which is modern Romania.
And that's where we get into the mythical Solomonari and the legend of a plant called palavraga.
Third, we'll jump to the present. We're going to introduce metamaterials in adversarial fashion, and we'll define how these modern sciences use structure, not chemistry, to manipulate reality.
And then finally, we bring it all together. We'll explicitly draw the conceptual lines and ask if the legendary panacea of the South, Silphium, and this hidden miracle plant of the North, the palavraga, are in fact the same thing.
Or at least representing the 2 poles of an ancient technological wisdom.
Exactly.
Okay, let's unpack this incredible story. We have to start with the plant that defined antiquity's wealth and health. Silphium. What exactly was this thing, and why did it get so unbelievably valuable?
Silphium was, and this isn't an exaggeration, arguably the most famous plant of antiquity. It had these evocative nicknames like the vegetable sex, or a more academic one I like, the ghost in the machine of history.
A ghost in the machine. Why that name?
Because its loss left such a massive gaping hole in the historical and pharmacological record. Botanically, it belonged to the Apiaceae family. So think of things, like celery, parsley. But specifically, it was a species of the Ferula genus, which are the giant fennels.
But the value wasn't in, eating the leaves like celery. It was in something it produced.
Precisely. The plant produced this incredibly potent dried golden resin. It came from the root and the stalk, and they called it Lazăr, L-A-S-E-R.
Lazăr.
And Lazăr was, unequivocally, the most expensive substance in the ancient world. The quality of this one plant is just staggering to think about today.
How central are we talking?
Well, Pliny the Elder, he recorded that Silphium was sold for its weight in silver. But often you'll see in other sources that it was more highly prized than gold.
So what does that mean in real terms? Can we put a price tag on it?
We can. The sources say that 1 pound of Lazăr resin could cost 1,000 denarii.
1,000 denarii. Okay, for you listening, what does that actually mean? Help us picture that.
Well, think about this. A skilled Roman artisan, or a standard legionary soldier, right? A professional. They might earn about 900 denarii in an entire year.
Wait, so a single pound of this plant resin was worth more than a year's wages for a highly productive worker.
Exactly. This wasn't just a commodity. This was a strategic state resource.
And we know this for a fact because of Julius Caesar, right? His actions kind of speak louder than words here.
Absolutely. During his civil war against Pompey, Caesar needed cash, fast. And he didn't just grab gold coins from the treasury. He went directly for the state's reserve of Lazăr.
He went for the plant resin.
He did. The records show he withdrew 1,500 pounds of it. This shows you it was seen as essential state wealth, a liquid asset, just like we would think of gold bars today.
And it wasn't just Rome. It was the entire identity of the place where it grew.
The city-state of Cyrene, the Greek colony in what's now Libya, for centuries, the vast majority of coins minted there featured the plant. They'd show its stalks, its leaves, or its very distinctive fruit. It was literally the face of their money.
Okay, so if it was that important, surely the ancients described it perfectly.
Yeah.
What did this mythical plant actually look like? And how are modern scientists trying to, find a surviving relative?
The ancient descriptions are actually surprisingly consistent. People like Theophrastus and Pliny, the natural historians, they all paint a similar picture.
Which was?
It had a thick, black-barked root. They often described it as being about 48 centimeters long, so almost half a meter. Its stalk was like a giant fennel, reaching these incredible heights, maybe 2 to 3 meters tall.
And the leaves are like celery, you said.
Yes, but the key feature, the one you see over and over on those Cyrenian coins, making it unmistakable, was its distinctive tear-shaped or heart-shaped fruit.
The heart-shaped fruit. That's critical, right? That's supposedly the origin of the modern heart symbol we use for love.
It is. But back then, it was explicitly associated with the plant's use for sex and for fertility control.
Which brings us to the modern search. For 2,000 years, everyone just assumed it was gone forever, extinct.
Totally. Presumed lost. But then, in 2021, a huge potential breakthrough. A Turkish professor named Mahmut Miski published research on this really rare plant called Ferula drudeana.
Found in Turkey.
In Turkey's central Taurus Mountains, yes. And what Miski noticed was that this plant physically matched the ancient descriptions almost perfectly.
Okay, so what were those key physical matches? The details.
Well, it had the right morphology, black-barked roots, nearly 50 centimeters long. It had a pleasant aromatic smell, unlike Ephedra, which was the cheap, foul-smelling replacement they used later.
The fruit.
And crucially, it develops that iconic heart-shaped fruit. It also had this opposite branching pattern that you can see clearly depicted on the Cyrenian coins. It was just an incredible match.
A huge step.
Yeah.
But what about the chemistry? Did the chemical analysis of this Turkish twin, this drudeana, back it up?
It did. Miski's team identified 30 different secondary metabolites in the plant. One of them was a compound called shyobunone because it specifically matches the anti-inflammatory and, critically, the contraceptive and medicinal claims made for Silphium.
Wow.
But what really solidified this finding was that shyobunone was independently found in an analysis of Roman-era dental plaque samples.
So people in the Roman world were definitely eating something with this exact compound in it.
They were. It strongly suggested they were consuming a Ferula species that contained shyobunone.
Okay, so here's where it gets really interesting and where we hit our first major scientific snag. I guess we can call it the phylogenetic obstacle.
Yes, the big one.
If Ephedra in Turkey is the missing Silphium, you have to explain how a plant from Turkey ended up being the defining export of North Africa, 1,700 kilometers away.
That is the scientific elephant in the room. It's what prevents universal acceptance of this theory. Molecular phylogenetics, which is basically tracing the genetic family tree of plants.
The DNA.
The DNA studies, yeah. They show that Ephedra descended from Central Asian Ferula populations. The study found, and this is a quote, no connection to North Africa.
So the North African Ferula plants are a totally separate group, genetically.
A distinct separate group, correct. The DNA says they didn't evolve in the same place.
So that leaves us with two main hypotheses, and both of them are pretty fascinating.
Right. Hypothesis 1 is that Ephedra is just an incredibly close relative, maybe a case of convergent evolution.
And hypothesis 2.
Hypothesis 2 is the one that connects directly to the ancient trade routes we're going to talk about. It suggests that ancient Greek or Cyrenian botanists smuggled seeds, or maybe even roots, from the original North African population all the way to Anatolia, which is modern Turkey.
So they were essentially backing up their most important technology. They brought the secret to a new protected environment.
Exactly. These transplanted populations would have then established these little relict populations in protected orchards near former Greek settlements, which is precisely where Miski found the plant growing today.
That smuggling route, that ancient attempt to protect the technology,
Yeah.
that feels like a really critical piece of this whole puzzle.
It's huge.
Before we track that route north, we really need to fully appreciate the impact of Silphium. Let's expand on his main use, what you call the contraceptive of the aristocracy. What was the sociological impact of that?
It was antiquity's most effective and versatile pharmaceutical. I mean, Pliny alone listed it in 39 distinct remedies.
39.
For what? Everything. Curing venomous bites, rheumatism, fevers, tumors, you name it. But its enduring cultural and sociological importance was its role as a chemical liberator.
A chemical liberator.
Ancient physicians, people like Cyrannus of Ephesus and Dioscorides, they prescribed it for conception, or to expel menstrual flow, or even fetuses.
So it gave women, especially wealthy women who could afford it, real control over their fertility. It must have totally changed family planning dynamics in the Roman world.
That's the core insight. It allowed for what one source called eros without consequence.
And that explosive demand, created by this really effective, non-surgical method of fertility control, combined with all its other uses, that's what ultimately doomed it.
That's the tragic irony. We are looking at what scholars now recognize as humanity's first documented, verifiable species extinction caused by human activity.
And we usually blame that on Roman greed, right? Overharvesting, overgrazing. But the source material reframes that. It argues that anthropogenic climate change was a dominant fatal factor. That sounds incredibly modern.
It is modern, but the mechanism is ancient. The plant was endemic to an extremely small area, a tiny little strip of the Cyrenaic steppe, maybe 200 kilometers by 50 kilometers.
And it had a unique, fragile biological requirement.
A requirement tied to its history. Cold stratification for germination.
Okay, let's unpack that for the listener. What is cold stratification?
Think of it like an ecological clock. A lot of temperate seeds have this. They need a sustained mandatory period of cold, moist conditions, basically a proper winter.
And that signals the seed.
It signals to the seed that spring is reliably coming, and only then will it germinate. It was a kind of ecological memory left over from the colder Pleistocene epochs.
And the ancient Romans broke that ecological clock.
Well, when they took over Cyrenaica, they prioritized short-term exploitation. They engaged in widespread, really aggressive deforestation for timber and for pasture.
And that had knock-on effects.
Huge effects. The deforestation led to massive soil erosion and, this is key, significant albedo change.
Albedo change, meaning the ground surface got darker.
Exactly. It absorbed more solar heat. These changes, coupled with overgrazing by nomadic flocks, led directly and rapidly to desertification.
So the winters just stopped being reliably cold and moist enough for the seeds.
That's it. The plant famously did not admit to cultivation because it was utterly dependent on that pristine ecosystem. It couldn't be farmed.
And there's another piece to that, isn't there? Something about a fungal web.
It likely relied on a complex mycorrhizal network. This is a delicate, critical fungal web deep in the soil that provides the plant with nutrients and moisture it just couldn't get on its own.
So when the Romans tamed the land, as they would have seen it,
they broke the knit of that biological web. The environment could no longer provide the necessary cold stratification, the seeds failed to sprout, and the entire population it aged out and died.
the whole system just collapsed. And that brings us to the tragedy of 54 CE.
The definitive endpoint. It's recorded by Pliny the Elder. He writes that the very last stalk of Silphium was found, and it was sent as a curiosity to the notoriously excessive Emperor Nero.
Imagine that. The physical end of an entire economic and pharmacological era reduced to a strange garden novelty for an emperor who probably didn't even understand its true value.
It's such a tragic bookend to the story.
So we have the ghost of this relaxing rod in North Africa, a possible Turkish twin, and this smoking gun that points towards a sophisticated ancient smuggling route. We need to follow the intellectual line north now, specifically to the Carpathian Mountains, ancient Dacia, modern Romania,
Right.
because this is where the structural counterpoint to Silphium is supposed to reside.
This is where we get into the deep conceptual dive of the pharmacological axis of the ancient world. Abandon our modern chemistry-first mindset.
And think like the ancients.
Exactly. They classified plants by their structure, their morphology, not by their DNA. And the unifying principle across this huge distance is the shared structural component. The hollow, jointed stalk of the Ferula genus, which the Greeks called the narthex.
The narthex, that's famous from Greek myth, right? Particularly with the Titans.
Absolutely. The narthex is the exact botanical tube that Prometheus used to steal celestial fire from the gods.
Why that specific plant?
Because the pith, the stuff inside the hollow stem, it burns incredibly slowly. It insulates the embers. This allowed early humans to transport fire over vast distances without it going out. It wasn't just a plant, it was a piece of technology, a fire transport vessel.
And this structural technology was recognized across Eurasia.
It was.
Yeah.
And the source material argues that this technology, the rod, was split into two distinct but necessary poles of consciousness.
Okay, two poles.
That's right. In the south, at Cyrene, you had the southern pole, Silphium, the relaxant.
The agent of peace, healing, biological liberation.
Right. But then you travel 1,500 to 1,700 kilometers north-northwest to the Hyperborean lands of Dacia or Romania, and there the rod structure manifested very differently.
In Dacia, the chemical specialization was the complete opposite.
It became Ephedra, Ephedra distatia, often called the wolf's tail, and Ephedra as the molecular predecessor of amphetamine.
So this was the northern stimulant.
The vegetable war, you could call it. The agent of focus, adrenaline, heat. The Dacians were known for their warrior culture, so they were structurally aligned with this stimulant pole.
And the sources suggest this duality was, mediated by a god?
Apollo, the god of light. The legends say he wintered specifically in Hyperborea, acting as the switch between these two poles. The ancient world seemed to understand that structural balance required both of these chemical states.
So this concept of a northern stimulant rod brings us to the specific Romanian twin plant that mirrors Silphium, the legend of the Polovraga.
Yes. Romanian folklore is deeply centered on the Polovraga plant. It's often described as a miracle cure, a true panacea.
And where's it found?
In the depths of the Carpathian Mountains, and it's frequently associated with the cave of Zalmoxis, the great Dacian deity. Conceptually, Polovraga is identical to Silphium, a cure-all that granted vitality and healed virtually all diseases.
So the grand unified theory being suggested here is that Polovraga, Silphium, and even the Vedic visionary drink Soma are all, genetic echoes of a Proto-Indo-European cult of the rod?
Exactly, one that adapted to different climates. It's an evolutionary adaptation of the same botanical structure.
How so?
In the intensely hot, sunny south, the plant put its energy into producing that golden resin, the lazar, for protection. That created the valuable sap.
But in the cold north?
In the intensely wet, cold mountain north, the plant forced all its energy downward. It grew a giant, complex root structure to survive the long, frozen winters. The Dacian priests would harvest this enormous, powerful root, the panacea for healing and vitality, while the Cyrenians harvested the sun-stress sap.
So the Polovraga legend represents the cold climate, giant root version of the same ancestral Ferula technology.
That's the idea.
And the keepers of this northern structural secret are the mysterious Solomonari. We have to talk about these legendary figures.
The Solomonari are the mythical weather wizards of Romanian folklore. They're associated with the Zalmoxian priesthood, who are known historically as the capnobutai,
which translates to
smokewalkers or cloud treaders. They were reputed to have immense knowledge and the power to control rain, storms.
What is the central piece of equipment always associated with the Solomonari?
Their core iconography is the possession of a golden wand, a staff. And the source material argues pretty convincingly that this staff is a direct, stylized continuation of the Ferula stalk, the rod.
So it's not just a ceremonial stick, it's the physical representation of the structural secret they protect.
Exactly. This is the key. The belief that the Solomonari controlled the weather is rooted in the structural technology of the plant itself.
How does that work? How is a plant connected to controlling storms?
Well, why would a hollow, jointed, 2-meter-tall plant be associated with controlling fire or storms? The Ferula stalk, being the tallest plant in its immediate, often exposed environment, hollow and full of water and sap.
It would function as a natural lightning rod.
An excellent lightning rod. The ancient association of the Solomonari with controlling fire from the heavens, lightning and storms, is rooted in the literal technological function of the plant's structure to attract or channel electrical energy.
You mentioned a legendary connection through this wisdom to King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba. That seems to hint at a vast, hidden network of knowledge exchange.
It does. The folklore around the Solomonari often links their wisdom to a lineage connected to King Solomon, sometimes through a mythical institution called the Scholomance.
The legendary Dacian school of black magic.
Right. And while the detailed specifics of the Solomon and Sheba link are, shrouded in legend, the very name Solomonari suggests their wisdom is primordial and pan-Eurasian. It connects them to ancient economic and mystical networks that stretch from Cyrene and the Levant through Samaria and all the way to the north.
So the Solomonari were the guardians of the Golden Wand. They were ensuring the survival of this structural knowledge in the north, even as the biological version in the south collapsed.
That's the argument.
This makes that whole smuggling hypothesis, the one tied to the Turkish Ferula drudeana, far more plausible.
How so?
Well, if the Dacian priests, the capnobutai, were experts in this structure and its pharmacological uses, and the Greeks were desperately trying to save their own southern version, it implies a shared awareness of this pan-Eurasian cult of the rod.
That the critical element they all understood wasn't the chemistry.
Right. It was the sacred shape, the rod structure, which dictates the power.
And this focus on structure, the idea that geometry defines function, is precisely the principle that drives our next section, modern metamaterials.
Let's make that conceptual leap then. Using the rod as our bridge, We need to leave the world of ancient botany and weather wizards and define the modern concept of the rod, metamaterials. This is where that ancient principle, that structure dictates power, reemerges in cutting-edge physics labs.
Right. Most people have probably heard of things like invisibility cloaks, but the core concept of a metamaterial is much broader and, in a way, simpler.
Okay, so conventional material, like water or glass, its properties are determined by its chemistry, its atoms.
Exactly. If you want glass to sparkle differently, you change its chemistry. You add lead, for instance, to make lead crystal.
But metamaterials, they just throw chemistry out the window.
Completely. Metamaterials are artificial materials engineered with unique properties you just don't find in nature. And those properties are dictated entirely by their meticulously engineered internal structures.
So they're built from tiny, repeating structural units.
And it's not the material of the metaatom that matters. It could be copper, it could be plastic. It's the precise, programmed shape and the arrangement of that shape.
That's the revolutionary insight, isn't it?
It is. These structures are designed to be much, much smaller than the wavelength of the energy they're meant to interact with, whether that's light, sound, or magnetic fields. The material's property, its ability to bend or block that energy, is entirely programmed into the geometric structure of that metaatom.
So what's the classic example of a metaatom, the modern counterpart to the ancient narthex?
The most famous example is probably the split ring resonator.
Okay.
It's typically just a copper ring with a small gap in it mounted on a circuit board. Now, copper itself isn't magnetic,
Right.
but the structure of that split ring induces an electrical current when it's exposed to a specific electromagnetic field. And that induced current generates magnetism. So a structure made of non-magnetic material suddenly acts like a magnet purely because of its geometry.
And this is where the physics gets really fascinating. This structural manipulation allows engineers to create something called a negative refractive index. You have to explain that.
Okay, so normal materials, like glass, have a positive refractive index. They bend light in one direction, the way we expect. Left-handed media, which is what metaatoms allow us to create, have a negative refractive index.
So light bends in the opposite direction.
It bends the wrong way. And when you combine this effect in a controlled way, you can achieve really remarkable wave manipulation.
Like invisibility. We always hear about cloaking.
Invisibility cloaking isn't about switching off light. Not really. It's about making light waves flow around an object as if it weren't there.
Like water flowing around a smooth stone in a stream.
That's the perfect analogy. The structure of the metamaterial essentially guides the light around the object and then reforms it perfectly on the other side. This same principle also enables things like super-resolution microscopy, allowing us to see things smaller than what we previously thought was possible under the traditional limits of physics.
This structural manipulation isn't just about light, though. The sources you shared emphasize how these architectural principles are now vital in creating advanced textiles and practical armor, achieving what they call hidden strength.
Correct. We are moving from the macrostructure of the Ferula rod to the nanostructure of high-performance gear. Modern materials research is all about a hybrid, layered strategy for protective textiles, creating hidden strength in something that could look like everyday clothing.
And a lot of this starts by looking back at nature's toughest structures.
Precisely. It's bio-inspired engineering. We're looking at biological structures to figure out how to manage energy, like high-toughness recombinant spider silk.
Recombinant, so not from actual spider.
No, we can't really farm it. But we can engineer its molecular structure to create materials with just exceptional strength-to-weight ratios. They absorb impact energy far better than standard synthetics.
And there are other examples, like from the ocean.
We take inspiration from things like mussel basis, those tough, braided threads mussels use to anchor themselves to rocks. That teaches us how to build tough, layered materials that can handle a lot of stress.
So we take natural toughness, and then we pair it with engineered structural materials, like shear thickening fluids or STFs. This sounds like liquid body armor. How does that actually work? What keeps it liquid until the exact moment of impact?
That's the critical question. Their viscosity changes depending on the stress you apply. They're basically a suspension of incredibly tiny hard silica particles in a fluid.
So at rest, it's just a soft liquid.
The particles just float easily, but then you have an impact. A knife stab, a bullet strike.
And the force changes everything.
The massive force tries to rapidly slide the layers of fluid over each other, and that energy forces those suspended silica particles to instantly clump together and jam up. The material turns rigid and momentarily acts like a solid barrier.
So you impregnate this into Kevlar or other fabrics?
And it dramatically improves ballistic and stab performance. It instantly solidifies and stops the impact energy from forcing the fabric yarns to pull out or separate. It's a temporary structurally defined phase change.
It's incredible. So we have bio-inspired toughness, chemically engineered rigidity, hydrogels, but the most culturally resonant application of this idea of hidden structure has to be adversarial fashion.
Oh, absolutely. Adversarial fashion is the direct confrontation with the machine god. It's clothing designed specifically to defeat and disrupt algorithmic surveillance, especially facial recognition software. It is a modern technology of concealment.
How does a simple pattern on a jacket defeat a complex multi-million-dollar neural network? It seems impossible.
Well, facial recognition systems rely on deep learning. They use these artificial neural networks that have been trained on millions of images to identify specific features, edges, textures, the spatial relationships between, say, your eyes and your nose.
And adversarial fashion exploits that process.
It exploits known vulnerabilities and how these networks classify data. The garments incorporate specific visual patterns, which to us might just look like noise or static or just chaotic geometry.
And what does that noise do to the algorithm?
It acts as a targeted signal disruption. These patterns are engineered to interfere with the network's pattern recognition pathways. The AI looks at the image, and it just can't confidently classify it because the engineered visual noise disrupts all the features it expects to see.
So the system is then forced to mislabel the person wearing it.
Exactly. It might label the human as something else entirely, a zebra, a gibbon, a fire hydrant, or just an unclassified mass. It renders the human algorithmically invisible.
It's the digital equivalent of what the Solomonaris were doing with the lightning rod, using structure to channel or disrupt energy in a predictable way.
Absolutely. The sources explicitly link this conceptually back to metamaterials. While adversarial fashion doesn't physically bend visible light, the principle is analogous. Metamaterials use engineered structures, meta-atoms, for destructive wave interference. Adversarial fashion uses engineered visual structures, patterns, for visual interference to cancel the AI's ability to confidently classify the human. In both cases, structure dictates concealment.
Now we arrive at the culmination of this deep dive. It's time to draw the explicit, source-supported conceptual correlations. We have the ancient obsession with the structural integrity of the rod, the Ferula stalk, and the modern engineering obsession with the structural geometry of the meta-atom. The unifying theme remains. Structure dictates power.
Let's look at the first symmetry, which is the most direct physical and technological parallel. The meta-atom is the rod.
In the ancient world, the Ferula stalk, the narthex, was the quintessential biological meta-atom.
Correct. Its specific geometry, hollow, jointed, tall, was seen as this powerful technological vessel. It was capable of channeling different forms of energy. It channeled elemental power, the fire stolen by Prometheus.
And it channeled chemical power.
The potent golden Silphium resin. The golden wand, carried by the Solomonari, is the ultimate symbol of this ancient structural resonator. The power resided in the geometry, the shape of the
Engineer constructs these geometric vessels like the split-ring resonator, or nanorods, the artificial meta-atom, to manipulate energy.
And whether it's light or magnetism or physical impact, the power doesn't come from the copper or the botany. It comes solely from the structural arrangement and the geometry. In both ages, the specific engineered shape is the technology itself.
The second major parallel you pointed out links concealment across millennia. Adversarial fashion is the sacred straw. This takes us back to the Dacian priesthood.
The mystery of the sacred cargo wrapped in mundane straw. The historian Herodotus tells us the Hyperborean, or Dacian priests, sent their sacred cargo, which was potentially Ephedra or even Silphium seeds south, to the sanctuary at Delos. But the crucial detail is how they wrapped it, in common wheat straw.
This was classical steganography, hiding in plain sight.
Exactly. The priests used domestic noise, the most mundane, common packaging material available, to hide the wild signal, the sacred, potent cargo. They hid it from uninitiated eyes, from customs inspectors, or from thieves who would just ignore a bundle of common straw.
And this ancient method of concealment is being perfectly mirrored today in the digital realm.
It is. Adversarial fashion employs visual noise, chaotic, distracting, static patterns to make the human invisible or unrecognizable to the algorithmic surveillance systems.
It's the sophisticated technological descendant of the sacred straw.
It is. Using engineered disruption to cancel out the ability of the observer, whether that's a human customs agent or a digital neural network, to perceive the hidden signal. It's a persistent human strategy for autonomy and disruption.
The third conceptual symmetry centers on the structure of complexity, knitting reality versus the mycorrhizal web.
When engineers discuss metamaterials and transformation optics, they often use this metaphor of knitting the fabric of reality.
Right.
They describe manipulating waves in space by mathematically distorting coordinate systems and arranging their meta-atoms into these intricate, mathematically designed patterns. The engineer treats space or material as a malleable web that they have to structurally knit to achieve a function.
And this conceptual knitting perfectly mirrors the biological fragility that led to Silphium's demise.
Absolutely. Silphium's famous refusal to be cultivated, its failure when the land was tamed and simplified, suggests it was deeply woven into that fragile mycorrhizal network, that fungal web in the soil.
So the Roman practice of monoculture and environmental devastation literally broke the biological knit.
It did. The system collapsed not just from overexploitation, but from the destruction of the delicate, complex structural interdependence that supported the plant.
So in both cases, the ancient biological web and the modern physical structure, we see that power or efficacy or life itself depends entirely on the intricate, hidden interconnection of the structure. You break the web, you break the magic.
And finally, we come to what is maybe the most profound overlap, the duality of states, and the choice we made as a civilization.
The pharmacological axis required a balance between the north and the south, the stimulant and the relaxant.
The ancient world understood this balance was necessary. The southern relaxant, Silphium and contraception, provided biological autonomy and peace. The northern stimulant, Ephedra and adrenaline, provided war, speed, and vitality.
And modern physics has the same exact duality in wave manipulation.
Yes, we have positive refraction like glass, transparency, visibility, a standard state, and we have negative refraction left-handed media, invisibility, cloaking, a hidden or counterintuitive state.
And when we look at our own history, the sources suggest we made a very clear choice about which pole we retained and amplified.
We chose the stimulant toll. The structure of Ephedra, the Dacian vegetable war, was the direct blueprint for the synthesis of amphetamine by the Romanian chemist Lazăr Edeleanu in 1887.
So we now live in a hypervisible, highly focused, globalized culture of speed and constant output.
A state of perpetual positive refraction where we are under maximum surveillance visible to every system.
And tragically, we lost the southern relaxant. We lost Silphium, the agent of autonomy and measured existence.
We lost it. We structurally broke the mycorrhizal knit, driven by commodification. And now, our most advanced technology, metamaterials, is desperately trying to master negative refraction, the structural ability to achieve optical and algorithmic invisibility.
So both systems, ancient and modern, point to the same necessity.
That if we want balance or true autonomy, we have to access the hidden or negative side of the structural spectrum, whether that structure is botanical or engineered. The loss of Silphium perfectly mirrors our cultural prioritization of the visible and stimulating, which we're now trying to fight with structurally concealed technologies.
It is just astonishing that this deep symmetry exists. It links the botanical fate of a lost plant, the legends of Dacian smoke walkers carrying their golden lightning rods, and the 21st century engineers building high-tech camouflage and anti-AI gear. It all comes down to mastering the subtle, hidden structures of reality and realizing the price of losing that mastery.
What this deep dive has really revealed is the profound structural symmetry between the legendary goldenrod of the Solomonari and the engineered meta-atom of the physicist. Both are, at their core, technologies designed to manipulate energy, whether chemical, elemental, or electromagnetic, by leveraging precise, hidden, engineered structures.
And we've seen that the extinction of Silphium, driven by the pressure of unsustainable commodification, overexploitation, and the destruction of its environmental web, was humanity's first documented species extinction. The wild signal was destroyed because its perceived commercial value was deemed absolute.
So now, consider where we stand today. We are developing these incredibly powerful new technologies of concealment adversarial fashion, metamaterial cloaks, specifically to achieve hidden strength, to fight the hypervisibility imposed by the machine god of constant surveillance. These structural secrets are becoming the most valuable commodity in the digital age.
So the core question that the source material leaves hanging for you, the listener, is rooted in the tragedy of the rod. What happens if the secrets of modern hidden strength, the schematics, the algorithms, the design principles for these adversarial patterns, become fully commodified and mass-produced? just like the ancient healing rod.
When a technology, particularly one that's defined by a complex hidden structure, becomes a pure commodity, its protective advantage is instantly vulnerable. What happens if the neural networks and algorithms are simply retrained to detect the new noise of adversarial fashion?
Or if the structural secrets of metamaterials are industrialized and simplified without understanding the complexity of their application?
The structural advantage just vanishes. Does the pursuit of absolute visible commercial value always lead to the collapse of the complex hidden systems that underpin that very value?
The ancient world sacrificed their relaxant for money. They broke the biological knit. We should probably pause to consider what we might be sacrificing today by allowing our essential struggle for algorithmic invisibility and structural autonomy to become just another marketplace commodity, ripe for simplification and ultimately for failure.